I spent 40 years teaching other people's children how to listen, yet my own son never learned the meaning of silence. When I retired, I bought a small house by the ocean, a place where the wind could finally speak louder than people. I imagined mornings with coffee and gulls, and nights with nothing but waves. That was my dream. But dreams, I learned, can be stolen quietly. While I waited for the final inspection, my son Jason offered to take care of the house. He sent cheerful photos, music, lights, laughter. I thought he was celebrating the new beginning. When I finally drove down the coast to see it myself, I heard the bass from half a mile away. My paradise was shaking. But before I tell you the rest of what happened, I'd love to know where you're watching from, your city or your country. I enjoy hearing that because it reminds me that every home, no matter how far away, carries its own stories too. The first thing I noticed was the light, or rather, the way it had been bent into something else. Where I had imagined the porch catching morning like a prayer, the bulbs strobed and colored the sand. Speakers had been tucked behind palms. A rhythm walked the property like a living thing. I stopped at the gate because there was no reason to announce myself. The music told everyone who I was before I did. When Jason saw me, he smiled like a man who has already performed the story he wants people to believe. "Mom, you're here early. Isn't it beautiful?" He had a plastic cup in one hand and a coil of keys in the other. He wore the kind of grin I had learned to read in parent-teacher meetings. Confident, rehearsed, allergic to discomfort. "You said the work wouldn't be finished until next week," I said. My voice was small by design. There is a difference between a woman who cannot be heard and a woman who chooses not to raise her voice. Around us, young people waved for him as though he were a sun they were orbiting. Someone leaned out of a pickup and shouted, "Hey, the boss's mom's here!" Laughter, a cheer. My name braided into the clamor like a ribbon into a knot. Jason hugged me. His embrace smelled like beer and cologne. "I thought I'd give the place a test run," he said. "Just friends, Mom. It'll be fine. We're being careful." Careful, in his mouth, meant quick transactions and borrowed furniture. It meant that the landscaping had been trampled into a cocktail lounge and the half-built guest room had been refashioned into a DJ booth. Glass bottles rested where a bench should be. One of my wicker chairs had been repurposed as a prop. The sight made something inside me cool and precise. I walked through the rooms as if I were reading a document someone had forged. A neighbor I knew, Olivia, squeezed my hand when she spotted the expression on my face. She had come with me because she had always been my first witness. The woman who watched the neighborhood like a lighthouse watches a harbor. Olivia lowered her voice so only I could hear. "He's been doing this for weeks," she said. "I bring recordings sometimes. People complain to me, but they're scared." "You make recordings?" I asked. "I do," Olivia said. "At night, when I can't sleep. Then I put them on this." She handed me a small flash drive, the kind that fits into keys. "I thought you might want proof." Proof. The word has weight, the way a stone has weight in a river. I held the drive like it was a pebble I might toss back into the tide. Jason laughed at the exchange, making a joke about being famous in the town. He took another phone call and walked toward the sand, waving a hand like a man who believes his freedom is in his gestures. The flash drive felt warmer than I expected. Not from heat, but from what it carried. I slipped it into my pocket because confrontation at the gate, when everyone is watching, is not my first strategy. I have always liked to see things before I speak, to be surgical rather than theatrical. At the edge of the deck, a young woman with glitter in her hair handed Jason a stack of flyers. "New Friday night series," she said. "Bring the house down." Jason tucked a flyer into his pocket and said, "We'll keep it low-key for now, just friends." Low-key, in the way he used it, meant he planned to scale it up until the town called it unruly. I found the room that would have been mine. The builder had left a paint swatch taped to the inside of a closet. "Sea glass," it read in my tidy handwriting from the months I had chosen colors and fabrics. Someone had thrown a sleeping bag over the window seat. Confetti flecked the floor like spent sparks. A lipstick mark stained the pillow. My breath narrowed, not with rage, but with the tidy, arithmetical shock of someone counting loss. "Mom, don't make a thing out of it," Jason said when he saw my face. He thought containment could be achieved by mild reproach. "I'll clean it up. I'll pay for any repairs." "How do you plan to pay for anything when you're charging people to come?" I asked. I had seen the flyers, I had seen his posts, the cheerful captions with images of lanterns and laughing crowds. He blinked, then smiled as though the blinking erased the question. "We're not charging much," he said. "It's just a cover, you know, for the crew, the DJ." His hands fluttered as if the numbers were feathers. To him, accounting was decoration. Olivia pressed my arm. She had been watching Jason for months, she said. "He lists the place on a site. He collects payments through an app. I've had people knock on my door at night, asking where the party is. They're not locals. They fly in for a weekend." Her voice softened. "I saved footage. You should hear it." We stood in the hallway while a bass line marched the house into a trance. A teenager attempted a moonwalk and knocked over a stack of paint cans that had been left for the crew. Someone cried, "Encore!" and all of them obliged with shouts. The surreal sensation of watching your future life be rearranged like a stage prop is particular and bitter. It tasted like seeing a photograph of yourself at an age you have not yet reached. I could have gone at once to the town hall or to the contractor. I could have demanded police intervention. Instead, I went to Jason's room and sat on the mattress they had left, spread across his floor like a picnic. I let the music find me and observed how he moved among his guests. He was a boy playing a man's part. There is a strategic patience that comes with age. I knew what the first evening would do to him, embolden him. The longer it went, the less likely he would notice the little things that reveal guilt. A misplaced receipt, a hurried message, a name on a list he did not recognize. I wanted proof that could not be shrugged away with excuses, proof that would read like a ledger. So that night, I took the flash drive from my pocket and waited until the yard was loud and the street was full. I did not record myself. I simply watched as Olivia approached me under the gesture of a borrowed moonlight. "You want me to play it now?" she mouthed. I nodded. She slipped the tiny drive into a small, battered laptop on a folding table near the kitchen. The speakers were low, but I did not need them loud. The first clip was a fragment of an invitation, a voice saying, "Outdoor at the Brooks property, Friday night, $20 cover." It was a man's voice I did not recognize. The second clip contained laughter. My chest tightened at the smallness of it. The recording gave context to the picture and the flyers. It turned rumor into ledger entries. I kept my face as blank as I could. The people around me danced, unaware that the woman whose house they were bending into a stage was standing among them. Jason returned to me, eyes bright, and kissed my cheek. "This will be great for the neighborhood," he said. "People will know the spot." "People already know the spot," I said, "and some of them are paid customers." My voice was soft, but the words had edges. He laughed then, because there was always a laugh to patch over a seam. "It's all temporary," he said. "Soon the construction will be done, and this will be a memory." Temporary is a dangerous word when used to justify permanent damage. There was no drama in my leaving. I walked back to my car and sat for a long time with the engine off, listening to the music travel like a tide across the road. I thought of the years it had taken to save every dollar, the modest sacrifices that had felt like investments in a future full of unspoken mornings. I felt a fierce, cold certainty form, not of revenge, but of measurement. If he would treat what I built as an event space, then I would give him metrics he could not spin away. The first move would not be public spectacle. It would be paperwork and patience, obsidian in its quietness. I turned the key, and the music seemed for a moment to falter, as if it sensed a different kind of listening had arrived. When I woke the next morning, the house carried the after-smell of a party, spilled beer and sunscreen that the sea couldn't hide. I sat on the back steps with a cup of tea and felt the flash drive warm where it lay against my cardigan. It was a small thing, but it held more than sound. The town had begun to whisper. People I had taught for years crossed the street to avoid my gaze. Olivia met me at the cafe and slid her phone across the table. The screen showed my porch strung with lanterns and a headline, "Beachfront Party House. Book now." Dates, prices, a smiling photo of Jason in the banner. She also handed me a folded printout, Jason's spreadsheet he'd flaunted at the gate. Date, event, cover, notes. The numbers were modest, but they formed a sum all the same. "Do you know how many people he's taken money from?" Olivia asked. "A woman told me she paid $20 at the gate. She thought it was a community event." I drove back that afternoon. Jason welcomed us like a man unveiling a miracle. He had a cigarette, an easy grin, and a laptop on a folding table. He clicked through tabs: catering expenses, DJ cost, a column labeled My Share, and pushed a printout toward me. In the corner a note read, "Covers collected via AppX, transfers weekly." Who did he think he was doing this for? "Who are you charging?" I asked. "Tourists, locals, just people who want a good night," he said. "It helps the crew, the cleanup. I'll pay for the repairs." His voice was quick and practiced. He had learned to make numbers sound like plans. I watched the way guests moved through rooms that should have been empty. They treated my future home like a stage. A child knocked over paint cans. Someone laughed and shouted, "Encore!" This familiarity with disarray was the thing that hurt the most. Not that the damage could be fixed, but that the thoughtless had been given free rein. While he led a man to inspect the decking, Olivia leaned close. "One woman said the app showed Brooks' residence as the payee," she murmured. "She thought it was yours." When the crowd thinned, I checked the refuse pile. Bent cups, a battered cooler, scraps of paper, and found a small thermal receipt scored by a handheld card reader. Date, amount, merchant, Brooks' residence. The merchant line sat like a name carved by mistake. Paper is a patient witness. I folded the receipt into my pocket with the drive. He hoped I would never find out. That night, the proof occupied my thoughts like neat stacks of graded papers. A flash drive with footage, a crude ledger, a receipt with my name. Each piece might be explained away alone, but together they suggested pattern and intent. I had always taught my students that patterns tell stories. This one was about appropriation and profit. I went to the town office the next morning under the guise of checking on permits. The clerk read statutes aloud while I took notes, and then said, "Temporary events on private property often require a permit or a venue license. Complaints can trigger inspections. Video and receipts help investigators." It was practical language, not vindictive, and it felt like a recipe. Back at the house, I asked Jason to sit down. I did not show him my temper. Temper is a poor tool for evidence. Instead, I placed the receipt and a copy of the spreadsheet between us. The music thumped as an audience observed an argument that had not yet become spectacle. "You promised you wouldn't open the place until I moved in," I said. He leaned back and smiled the smile that used to make mothers trust him. "It's only temporary," he said. "Besides, people love it. It brings attention to the neighborhood." "It brings attention to numbers," I said. "You used my name. You charged people. You're calling it a venue." "It's an idea," he replied, "and I'm responsible. I'll refund anyone who complains. I'll fix anything that breaks." Refunds are tidy words. They smooth a ragged edge without addressing the seam. "You could have asked me," I said. "You could have told me." His voice dropped. "You don't know what it's like to start, Mom. I'm trying." "Starting shouldn't mean stealing," I told him. "You built a business on something that isn't yours." He attempted indignation then, and the room shifted. "You're attacking me," he said. "I thought you'd be proud." "Pride is not a license," I answered. He put a hand on my shoulder as if to anchor us both. I let him for a moment, then moved my hand away. The guests grew restless. Someone called for a song. He laughed at my seriousness like it was a joke he had not yet learned. I left with the folder of papers and the quiet conviction of someone who keeps accounts. The plan would be methodical. Collect the evidence, record witnesses, consult those who could translate statutes into action. I was not interested in spectacle. I was assembling a ledger that would read in plain language for anyone who cared to look. Over the following days, I visited neighbors, wrote down names, and asked if anyone had recorded the noise or taken photos. A teenager gave me a video file of a DJ list with the property listed as the venue. An older woman brought a message thread where Jason had boasted of full houses and cover grips. One line made my stomach drop. Olivia handed me a small stack of complaints people had murmured at her doorstep. The mosaic of proof grew. At one point, I confronted a guest who had helped set up chairs. She was apologetic and said she had believed the events were sanctioned. "Jason told us it was okay," she said. Her eyes dropped when I mentioned the receipt. I paid at the gate. It said, "Brooks' residence." I thought it was for a charity donation. Confusion and embarrassment are common patterns when people discover they've been enlisted in someone else's shortcut. When I returned to the house the next night, I did not interrupt the party. Instead, I watched. I took notes in the margins of the spectacle. I catalogued the ways a person rationalizes a misdeed until the rationalization becomes his reality. I recorded names, times, and the ebbing of the music. Each detail was a stitch in the fabric I planned to unravel. On a Sunday morning, the contractor arrived to check on the roof. He squinted at the trampled lawn and the dented rail and said, "I told you the crew shouldn't have let them in yet." He mentioned that Jason had been handling things and that he'd signed off on some late-night arrangements. He said he was making it work, the contractor said, but he doesn't understand what unfinished means. I filed that too. Unfinished is a legal state as well as a moral one. By the end of the week, I had a small folder, a flash drive of footage, the spreadsheet, a merchant receipt, witness statements, and a list of neighbors willing to testify about noise and trespass. It felt tidy in my hands, the way a graded set of essays looks when the rubric has been followed. There would be consequences. I had no desire to humiliate him on the street. I wanted a lesson that would teach responsibility. I was patient because patience is the teacher's habit. I was precise because precision is the law's language. The house, which had begun as a private shore of dreams, had been turned into a cash register. If he wanted to trade my future for his short-term gain, then he would learn that accounts have to be balanced. That night I sat on the porch while the moon made a wedge of silver on the water and planned the next steps with the quiet satisfaction of a person who knows how to build a case. The music seemed farther away. The evidence felt close enough to touch. I had always thought litigation was a last resort, something for people who had lost patience with mercy. But there are moments when the slow gears of law spin faster than we expect, and I needed one of those moments. Mr. Collins, the lawyer I'd met at a community meeting years ago, sat across from me with a cup of office coffee and the sort of efficiency that comforts teachers. "You have more than grudges," he said. "You have documentary evidence. That matters." He read the folder like a man reading a syllabus. Dates, deposits, the merchant receipt with my name printed where mine should not have been, the video clips. "There's an angle," he said. "He used your name as a payee. He collected money on property that's not his. If he's represented the property as available for public hire, that implicates liability for damages and trespass." He spoke in measured sentences, the way one explains a proof to a student before a test. I left his office with a letter signed and stamped, a directive he would use if negotiation failed. I did not want negotiation to fail, but I also did not wish to be naive. Clarity reduces the chance of avoidable theatrics. "Don't humiliate him," Mr. Collins advised. "Teach him responsibility." We agreed on a course, notices, warnings, then an ultimatum that would make legal responsibility unavoidable. Back at the house, the rhythm of the parties had become a calendar. Friday nights had a new meaning. People came, left, and came back again. The lawn looked less like a garden and more like a map of footsteps. I continued to gather statements. Neighbors who had called about loud music, a delivery driver who remembered seeing cash exchanges, a young woman who'd accepted a refund when a problem was reported but kept the message proving payment to Brooks' residence. One afternoon, I sat on the unfinished deck with a thermos and watched Jason coordinate a setup for what he called a special event. He looked eager, like a boy who'd found an unlocked candy store. He did not notice that I had my phone open with a clear list of names and times. When he signed a paper that his crew had handed him, a one-page form promising responsibility, he assumed it was mundane. He did not read it properly. He signed it with a tipped grin, the kind of casual signature people leave when they are confident nothing will be required of them. I had asked Mr. Collins to draft a document that could serve two purposes: to sound administrative enough that Jason would sign without hesitation, and to contain clauses that would establish his personal liability for unsanctioned events and damages. The form looked like a contractor's addendum: acknowledgement of temporary site use and assumption of responsibility. It referenced cleanup fees, noise ordinances, and a clause about indemnifying the property owner for any damage or unauthorized commercial activity. He signed. When I watched him trace the letters, I thought of the many times I had watched signatures form on report cards and parental notes. A signature is a promise, as much as it is a name. He had promised responsibility, and the promise would become the hinge of the lesson I intended to teach. That night, as the event grew into something larger, I asked Mr. Collins to wait at the property. We would give Jason an opportunity to accept the terms and begin to secure refunds or adjustments before matters escalated. We would show him the administrative path first. I prefer lessons that allow for correction before punishment. It is more instructive to repair a ledger than to destroy it. My presence at the house that evening was calm. I sat near the kitchen with a cup of tea and let the music wash over me as if I were collecting data. The guests did not know that the woman whose home they occupied was cataloging their comings and goings, license plates, faces, times. When Jason approached with 2 beers and that familiar self-assured smile, I handed him the form with my phone displaying the clause about indemnity. "Just sign it," I said. "It says you'll be responsible for cleanup, damages, and any fines if the town decides fines are due." He glanced at the paper, then at me. "Is this another one of your legal parades?" he joked. "Come on, Mom. I'm not a child." "You are responsible for what you've done," I said. "If you intended to manage events here, formalize it. Take responsibility." My voice did not rise. It narrowed. Contained indignation is a precise instrument. He stared at the clause that named me as the property owner and him as the party organizer. "I didn't know some of those lines meant that," he muttered. He had signed before reading. The habit of haste had finally boxed him in. "This isn't fair," he said, trying to reach the crowd for sympathy. "Fairness is not the point," I answered. "Accountability is." He hesitated, torn between pride and the instinct to avoid paperwork that complicates pleasure. Okay, he said finally, signing with a flourish that smelled of beer and denial. The room around us cheered at some song. The DJ cued a chant. The cheers blurred into a steady background. I left a copy of the signed form on the table and kept one for myself. The clause was explicit. The person assuming responsibility would be personally liable for any ordinance violations, property damage, and refunds to ticketed patrons. It also required that any advertising that designated the site as available for booking must be removed when unauthorized. In the morning, Jason posted another cheerleading photo online, himself with a row of lanterns, but the form would soon make his celebrations more complicated. Mr. Collins began the administrative steps: a notice, a request for the removal of promotional listings, and a clear statement of the legal consequences if Jason failed to comply. The notice was courteous but explicit. It offered a path to remedy and a date by which the listings and events should cease. I had no desire to escalate into courtroom theater. I wanted a ledger, a sequence of actions and responses that would show who chose what and when. I believed in measurements. That is the teacher's default. The notice gave him a chance to reverse course and fix the damage he had caused by accident or choice. If he complied, the lesson would be about restitution. If he did not, the lesson would be about responsibility with consequences. As the deadline approached, I watched for changes. Jason deleted some posts, claimed he had taken down listings, and promised refunds. At the same time, new messages arrived, complaints from people who had been charged, and claims about unreturned payments. A guest told me that a friend who had paid in advance for a private event woke up to find the house empty of hosts and full of trash. The contradiction between his words and the record tightened like a wire. On the last day before Mr. Collins would initiate formal filings, I drove to the town office with a stack of documents and a resolve that felt like a lesson plan. The clerk received the packet and began to process complaints. "We'll do a site visit if the complaint is credible," she said. "If the merchant name matches a private residence and there are multiple accounts, that strengthens the case for enforcement." When the officer arrived at the house that evening, he found festival lights dimming. There was an uneasy silence that feels like the moment before a storm. Jason approached the officer, his jaw working. He called me over like a man hoping to use familial presence as a shield. "Officer, we're just closing up," he explained. The officer nodded and asked a few questions, eyes taking in the scattered cans and the trampled lawn. Then he saw the signed form left on the table, and something in his posture changed. Paper matters in the hands of authority. "Do you have any receipts showing the merchant?" he asked. Jason fumbled for his phone. The officer took notes. We watched as the thin thread of casual explanation frayed. When the officer mentioned potential fines for noise and unauthorized business activity, the chatter around the yard dissolved into small pockets of concerned conversations. Some of the guests paced. Others gathered their things. The man whose credit card receipt had been printed as Brooks Residence looked at Jason as if he had been fooled. Jason looked at me then, for the first time without a rehearsed grin. His eyes registered the signed clause. "You set me up?" he said to me and then to the officer, as if the private betrayal could somehow be reframed as public entrapment. "I offered you a way to do it responsibly," I said. "You signed an agreement. Responsibility is not a trap, it's an obligation." The officer left with a notice to appear if infractions were confirmed and a request for the merchant account history. People collected their cars, and the house slowly became itself again, minus the confetti and the chairs left where they had been used. Silence returned like a tide. I knew the lesson would not be instant. It would be paperwork and conversations and a few uncomfortable phone calls. It would also have a moral geography, that you cannot profit from someone's long-term plan without their consent. That night, alone on the deck with a thermos and a notebook of names, I made the list of what I would accept as restitution: apologies, repairs paid in full, refunded tickets, and a clear cessation of unauthorized events. If he met those terms, I would consider modest leniency. I did not relish the hard part. I only wanted the house to be mine when I finally moved in. I wanted the sea to be louder than any amplifier. The night the lesson arrived, it did not come like a storm. It came like a ledger closing its pages, quietly, formally, and with an almost boring thoroughness. Mr. Collins and I had agreed to 2 moves, one administrative and one civic. The administrative move was the notice, the request to remove listings, the demand for refunds and repairs. The civic move would be public and restorative. Jason would be asked to make amends before neighbors and ticketed guests. I insisted it be reparative rather than vengeful. Responsibility, I told Mr. Collins, should remake him, not ruin him. We set the date for a community meeting. I used the language of civility, so the affair couldn't be easily dismissed as a spectacle. The flyer was brief and honest. Community meeting regarding unauthorized events at Brooks property, hearing and restitution. Mr. Collins delivered formal copies to listed guests and to the merchant account managers. Olivia walked the blocks handing notices to those she could find. Word spread in the way small towns gossip does, quickly and with a relish that belongs to people who keep each other honest. On the appointed evening, a small crowd gathered on the unfinished lawn. Some faces were sympathy, others were anger. A man who had paid $40 for a private night stood with a paper cup and a scowl. The contractor, hat in hand, counted missing paint tins. A mother held a small child who had been woken by music at midnight. People had come with receipts and videos saved on their phones. The scene felt like a classroom assembled for a test. Jason arrived looking surprised, then defensive, and finally weary. He had cleaned up superficially. There were fewer chairs left strewn about, and the DJ's equipment had been packed away. He walked toward the makeshift podium and cleared his throat. "Mom, I can explain." "You already have," I said. I kept the tone flat because flatness carries a different kind of weight than anger. It is evidence delivered as fact. You explained it to the town when you posted listings, when you charged people, and when you signed a paper promising responsibility. Mr. Collins stood beside me and summarized the administrative findings: the merchant records linking payments to Brooks Residence, the signed assumption of responsibility form, the receipts for damages, and the sequence of complaints. He read aloud a line from the clause Jason had signed. The signatory assumes personal liability for fines, damages, and refunds related to unauthorized events. He pronounced the options: refunds first, repairs second, and fines imposed by the town if the damage was not corrected. Several people stepped forward. A woman passed her phone to Mr. Collins and said, "He charged me $25 at the gate for VIP coverage." Then he disappeared. Another neighbor held up a clip of an early morning cleanup by volunteers who had been roped into hauling trash because Jason's crew had left. These were not dramatic revelations. They were simple facts with receipts. When facts accumulate, excuses grow thin. Jason's face moved through stages I had watched in classrooms: defiance, negotiation, then an awkward plea. "I didn't mean to. I thought I could manage," he said. He looked at me as if my disappointment would be the worst consequence. He had never quite measured that my disdain could be quieter than his shame, and sharper in a way that cut deeper. "Meaning matters," I said. "But so does impact. You used my name on receipts. You took money. You allowed damage to a property that was not ready. You signed a document making yourself responsible." My voice was not raised. It simply parceled the charges. "Now you must make it right." We offered him choices that would teach repair rather than inflict humiliation. First, he would refund anyone who had paid for events that did not deliver the promised services. Mr. Collins had already contacted the merchant account to cancel further transfers and to trace payments. The refunds were procedural, but they required Jason's cooperation to process communications with guests. Second, he would pay for repairs and cover contractor time for the deck and the garden. Third, and most consequential in my mind, he would participate in a public restitution, a community cleanup, and a small fundraiser to replace what had been broken, his labor equal to the cost of his mistake. There was a fourth item, which I insisted upon privately. He would remove all promotional listings, hand over any keys he had duplicated, and sign a short public apology that acknowledged what he had done. An apology, I suggested, should be specific. It should not be a fog of regrets, but a naming of harms. That was the kind of apology that becomes education. He balked at the idea of public contrition. "I can't do that," he said. "People will laugh. They'll say I lost my edge. They'll say whatever they want," I answered. "But standing in front of the people you deceived and saying the truth of it will teach you more than hiding ever will." My instruction was not theatrical. It was a deadline. The crowd watched as he tried to bargain. He offered weekend labor on the property instead of refunds to some, and discounts instead of full repairs to others. I refused partial measures. A refund is a literal correction of an economic wrong. To offer a discount for repair is to keep the accounting messy. I wanted the arithmetic to be clean. When he finally agreed, it was small and stuttering. He signed his name to a restitution schedule that Mr. Collins prepared on the back of a legal pad. Dates for refunds, estimates for repairs, a timeline for removing listings, and for the community cleanup. The signature did not look like the flourish of confidence he had used on the other paper. It looked like a man who had been required to read the terms of his own life. That night, as people gathered to help, he worked among them. He lifted boxes, swept sand from porches, and apologized to the contractor for the late calls. The work was not glamorous, but it is hard to pretend when your palms are raw. A small boy who had been bussed in for the party shook his hand and called him "sir" with the brittle politeness of someone who had been embarrassed. The phrase made the neighbors chuckle. The laughter was not cruel so much as a punctuation. At one point, a woman approached me with a small, folded piece of paper, a receipt with my name printed at the top, the same thermal print that had started this spiral. She handed it to me and asked quietly, "Will he pay me back?" Her voice was thin with hope. I looked at Jason, who was rinsing a stack of plastic cups with cold water, and then at the receipt. "Yes," I said. "He promised." It felt like a strange mercy to make a son face his mistakes in public. I would have preferred to teach him in private, but his choices had been public from the beginning. The ledger chose the forum. Around midnight, when most of the people drifted away and the lanterns swung like small moons, Jason cornered me by the shed. He had salt lines at the hem of his shirt and a desperation in his voice. "Mom," he said, "this will ruin me. People will never take me seriously again." "Perhaps," I said. "Perhaps seriousness is a better fate than constant applause." I wanted him to hear the tempered truth. A life of easy applause often lacks the ballast of responsibility. "You will learn to build something that lasts," I added. "If you want to keep doing events, do them with permission and with insurance. If you want to live here with me, then start by respecting the work that brought this house into being." He stood there, a man caught between two images of himself, the party promoter and the son who had once scraped mud from my classroom floor as a boy. For a moment, I saw both, and the sight made my chest ache in a way that was not anger, but a deeper sorrow. I had not wanted to break him. I wanted to reroute him. "Will you forgive me?" he asked. Forgiveness is not instant. Forgiveness sometimes requires accounting, restitution, and demonstration of change. "I will consider it," I said, "when I can see the change." He nodded as if he had been given an assignment. He looked small in the lantern light, humbled by the weight of the tasks he had agreed to. He picked up a broom and went back to work. The lesson did not end with that night. There were phone calls, emails, and a slow procession of refunds and contractor invoices. Mr. Collins kept the schedule and sent reminders when tasks went undone. Occasionally, Jason slipped. He would delay a refund or miss a deadline, and the town clerk would call. The presence of official scrutiny kept his promises from dissolving. The work was tedious and public, and that made it effective. Weeks later, as the deck was repaired and new plants took root where the trampled lawn had been, I would watch him wrestle with the new discipline. The house slowly reclaimed itself. The soundscape returned to gulls and wind. He learned to answer for a ledger rather than for the applause he once chased. It was not dramatic justice, no vanishing or public shaming, but a measured correction that required effort and reflection. The last piece of the lesson was quiet. On a morning when the sea was pale and the sky was sharp, he brought me a packet of receipts in an orderly envelope. "I refunded everyone," he said. "I booked the contractor. I discontinued the listings." His voice was tired but honest. I accepted the envelope and laid it on the kitchen table like evidence. He watched me with a look I had seen in many of my students after they finally understood an algebraic proof, recognition mixed with reluctant pride. "You taught me a better way to make something of myself," he said. I did not claim victory. I only felt a relief so small and profound it could fit into the hollow between two ribs. The house would still be mine when I moved in, and he, perhaps, would be different enough to stay. A lesson is not always a wound. Sometimes it is the careful mending of a future. I slept poorly that first week after the restitution night. It wasn't shame that kept me awake so much as an odd, waiting hush, like the silence between two notes where you can feel a melody deciding its next move. The sea was the same. The world had not altered its cadence. I, however, had been changed in the small, precise ways that come from having to turn a private hurt into public accounting. Jason worked every morning. He learned to arrive early and leave late, the schedule of someone repaying a debt by time rather than by words. He mopped floors until his hands ached, and he came to understand what a warranty means when you're asked to sign it with your labor. People watched him closely. They are curious by habit and merciful by temperament, but they were not ready to forget. I watched him too, sometimes from the kitchen window while my tea got cold and the gulls argued overhead. Watching is different from surveilling. It is the slow work of noticing whether a person will shape up or fall back into old grooves. A new contractor came with a quieter hand and a clipboard that did not smile. He measured boards and recaulked joints. He replaced broken slats on the deck and planted low grasses that would take the salt and make the yard look like the kind of modest pride one keeps to oneself. People who had come that night returned with gloves and tidy trucks and an economy of goodwill that surprised me. A woman who had paid for a private night came with 2 folding chairs and apologized for the trouble she'd caused by attending. "I thought I was helping someone I liked," she said. "I didn't know." The merchant account issues resolved slowly. Refunds came in batches. Some payments could not be traced, which made a few cases complicated. Mr. Collins kept a running file. He liked files the way some people like to water plants. "Keep everything," he told me. "Paper becomes proof in the places it needs to be." He was right. The ledger closed enough lines for people to breathe. Jason started making small gestures that were more than utility. He fixed the gate latch without being asked. He learned the names of neighbors he had only ever seen as customers. One afternoon, he swept the sand from the porch and found a paint swatch tucked into a chair cushion, the one I'd chosen in the quiet months when I imagined mornings. He held it up like someone who had stumbled on an old photograph, and for a moment, the amusement in his face softened into recognition. "You picked a soft green," he said, and the sentence was more like a question than a comment. "Yes," I said. "Sea glass." "You were always precise about colors," he said. "We are precise about the things that become our habits," I replied. The words felt ordinary, but they stitched something that had been pulled. He wrote me a letter that week. It was a clumsy thing. Apologies can be clumsy when they are sincere. And he slid it across the table while I was making coffee. It said what the work had begun to show, that he had been reckless, that he'd placed profit ahead of respect, that he was sorry. He asked for forgiveness. I read it twice, folding the paper on the counter as if the creases kept facts from leaking out. I did not burn the letter. I set it in a small bowl and left it on the mantel where it would age like a thing with a name. Forgiveness, if it is to be real, is not a bonfire. It is a small, deliberate storage of promise. I told him I would consider it when the receipts were finalized and the last tile was replaced. He nodded like a person taking a test he had hoped would be easier. The town's enforcement was neither theatrical nor cruel. It was procedural. A citation or two, a fine that stung but did not break him, and the careful ungluing of the promotional listings from the internet. That last part took longer than any of us liked. The digital world is porous. It keeps your past ads like a shadow. But the listings came down, one by one, and the crowds dwindled until the house sounded like the sea again. I invited Olivia for tea, and she arrived with a small tin of biscuits and a face that had the comfortable look of someone who keeps an eye open for friends. "You look like you," she said, "like when you first told me you'd bought it. Quiet, determined." "I'm relieved," I said. "It's less about punishment than it is about setting a shape for what's allowed here." She leaned forward. "Do you think he'll change?" she asked. Her voice was low, the way people make room for honest questions. "I don't know," I said. "Change takes more than a schedule. It takes boredom and obligation and a sense of consequence being ordinary. But he started the work. There was a small thing I did then that felt like both mercy and protection. I had Mr. Collins draft a simple legal instrument that clarified ownership boundaries and prohibited commercial use without my explicit written consent. It was not dramatic. No trust, no dramatic fortress, just a clear document that would make future misuses harder to argue away. He signed because he had to. He understood the difference between being allowed and being given consent. When I finally moved my boxes into the rooms I had imagined for so long, I found small traces of the follies past. A music sticker behind the pantry, a faint ring on a tabletop where someone had thought to leave a drink. These things are like bruises that pale. I cleaned them, smoked out some residue of perfume with lemon oil and old rags, and hung curtains that let light through without revealing everything. Neighbors came by with small, welcoming dishes. It felt less like a housewarming and more like a reintroduction. People spoke in the halting, appreciative tone of people who know a community's fabric had been tested and came out mended. A boy from down the street offered to help stack firewood, and I showed him how to split a log properly. He grinned when he managed a clean stroke, proud as a child who has been entrusted with a tool. Jason kept his word on refunds and repairs, though there were a few late nights when Mr. Collins had to call to remind him of deadlines. He did not post much on social media afterward. He seemed, in those small ways, to have traded noise for something quieter, a steadiness to the tasks he had undertaken. He worked part-time at a local cafe to make ends meet while he rebuilt clientele responsibly. This last part he told me one morning while we sat with coffee and salt air. "I'm trying to start small," he said. "Honest work." "Then start with steady," I said. "It lasts longer." He hesitated, then asked, "Will you let me come over sometimes? Not to throw parties, just sit, help around the place?" "Yes," I said, "but not as manager, not for money, as a son." My voice kept its coolness. My consent had boundaries. He came often after that, bringing small things he'd fixed or a breakfast he'd learned to make. We built a routine of chores and simple conversations about the weather and the birds. When he spoke of future projects, they were modest: repair the fence, plant a small herb bed, things with a timeline and an invoice. In the evenings, I would sit on the porch with the kettle and listen to the sea find its ordinary rhythm again. Sometimes he would sit across from me, hands folded, and we would say nothing for a while. Silence became a companion rather than a punishment. It was an education in itself. There were moments when resentment hovered like a gull waiting for a crumb. A neighbor would mention in passing a rumor about a new promoter in town, and I would feel a spike of alertness. I would go inside and count receipts, because old teachers keep their sums. But the ledger kept a steady shape and, more importantly, So did the boy who had become a man by doing the work he'd promised. On the morning before I moved in for good, I walked the house room by room. I opened the windows to let the salt air baptize the rooms. I set the sea glass cushion on the window seat and smiled without thinking. In the corner, on the mantel, the folded letter waited like a small archive of confession. I picked it up and read it one more time. There was no dramatic absolution in the lines. There was apology, a line or two of contrition, and a short paragraph about learning to measure pleasure against the cost it imposes on others. I folded the letter and placed it back in the bowl. I did not throw it away. I did not need to. Some things are better kept as reminders than as embers. They are the quiet marks that teach us what not to repeat. That afternoon, Jason walked me to the gate. He held a small set of keys in his hand, the ones he'd given me when he had, in the early days, wanted to prove trust. He looked at them and then at me. "I've turned in the extra keys," he said. "I didn't mean to abuse anything." "I know," I said. "And you did not mean it. But you did it. That matters. You'll keep proving the rest." He nodded, and there was a new steadiness in the way he stood. No bravado, just a posture of someone bearing facts. He hugged me, brief and honest. When I walked up the path, the house closed around me in the ordinary way houses do when they become true homes. Curtains, the smell of tea, a small lamp clicking on as the day cooled. I understood then that protecting my quiet was not an act of spite, but of caretaking. I had no taste for dramatic revenge. I preferred that the lesson live as something he would carry forward, like knowledge of how to plant a bed that does not wash away. The house would be a place of rest, and the lesson would be a seam in the fabric of his life. Sometimes, when the wind slid through the eaves and the gulls wrote white arcs over the water, I would think of the night the music swelled and of the ledger that followed. Justice, in my estimation, had not been theatrical. It had been precise. It had been work. It had not broken him. It had remade him into someone who could perhaps someday share my silence without misunderstanding it. There was relief in that possibility. There is a particular peace that arrives when work has been done and accounts balanced. I do not mean triumph. I mean the ordinary calm that follows responsibility. The curtains at my windows no longer rattle with speakers. The porch light now marks the hours instead of flashing for an audience. On good mornings, the gulls announce themselves, and the sea keeps the rest. Jason did not change overnight. He paid fines, he coordinated refunds, and he learned to show up on time. More importantly, he learned that trust is earned with effort, not announced with a laugh. He apologized in a letter and in labor. Both mattered. Watching him sweep the porch made me think of the small steps my students took when they finally understood a difficult grammar rule. Awkward at first, then steady. I kept his apology folded on the mantel. I kept the receipts in a drawer. They are not relics of victory. They are reminders that boundaries matter and that good things can be defended without cruelty. There is a fracture in our history, sure, but mending a fracture does not erase the scar. It teaches you how to dress it. People sometimes ask if I feel guilty for making him work publicly. My answer is blunt. I felt compelled to make the harm visible so he could no longer hide behind music. Mercy that ignores consequences is not mercy. It is a permission slip for repetition. I wanted repair, not revenge. In the end, the house belonged to me, and more than that, the quiet belonged to me. Jason belongs to a different lesson now, one he is learning by hand. The future is not sealed. It will contain both second chances and reminders. That is enough for me. If this story mattered to you, please like and subscribe, and tell me where you are watching from. Eleanor, Cape Cod, USA.